All right, we are recording. Still a couple more people coming in. Thanks for everybody's patience. We're all trying to adjust to this new world on the Zoom world on the cloud. So we appreciate everyone's patience. Still have a couple more. All right. All right, I just got a reminder from Jana McKenzie to everyone that to keep your videos off will help you with your bandwidth in case you have bandwidth problems. So if you get into that jam, just keep that in mind. Others who have really broad bandwidth, you're probably just fine. All right, I'm filling in for Mindy Putman, so I appreciate y'all's patience as we get started here. I'm going to do my very best to get through this as Mindy would. So those of you who know Mindy, she is our superintendent of the Park Planning and Maintenance Academy, and she would, if she were here, she'd be welcoming you. Hopefully y'all can see my welcome slide. If you can, just kind of wave like this. Okay, thank you. If you're on a cell phone or another device that is not showing up as your name, please see if you can change that in Zoom so I can record your attendance. If not, then please email Mindy after and let her know that you were on the call. I can see iPhones and other names. I don't, and I may not recognize them. So that's why we ask that make it very well known who you are if you can, please. If not, just email us. Want to recognize the different states that are participating today. This is kind of exciting. We have Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Fantastic. Just to let you know, we're recording this session and we will have it up on our website by the second week of September. The first three are already on the Southwest Parks and Recreation Training Institute site under Park Planning and Maintenance Academy News tab, okay? So if somebody has a hard time getting in, they always have another chance to hear Brian and go through this with us. First of all, we need to recognize the Southwest Parks and Recreation Training Institute. For those of you who do not know, we are part of a bigger, larger organization called the Southwest Parks and Rec Training Institute. And that's where Park Planning and Maintenance Academy fits in. Southwest Parks has been around for over 65 years. And I encourage you to visit the website at swprti.org to learn more about the annual conference and more about what the PPMA is like when we have the live event in Aurora, Colorado in the summertime. And we really missed seeing everybody in Aurora this last year. The Park Planning and Maintenance Academy is usually the first week of August. We are already planning for next year, August 2nd through the 5th. If you want to write that down, that's August 2nd through the 5th in 2021 in Aurora at the Hilton Doubletree. We changed hotels last year and the Hilton Doubletree is very comfortable and made for a really enjoyable experience. I hope you all can join us in person next year. Okay, I want to recognize our sponsors. And for those of you that have been in this Parks and Rec business for a long, long time, you know that we depend on our sponsors. And they're very important to us. They help make these things available. So you're getting this free training today because of our sponsors. So we can't do without them. They have stood by us during these trying times and we cannot thank them enough for their support. Many of you know LL Johnson, Mr. Dan Melchior, along with Professional Turf Products and Toro, Mr. Paul Reed from Rainbird and Edwin Aresco, I messed that up, sorry, from Musco Lighting. It has been so great to work with these folks over the last 3 years for PPMA, and they've just stood by us, and we can't speak enough about how great they are and dedicated to our profession. So thank you. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now and introduce our speaker. Our speaker will share his presentation with you, so you'll see that pop up. Please don't forget the chat feature to ask questions, and we will get to those as many as we can at the end of the session. I would like to introduce you to our presenter today, Mr. Brian Bristow. He is the Assistant Director for the Parks and Recreation Department of Allen, Texas. He's a Texas registered accessibility specialist, as well as a landscape architect and licensed irrigator. Brian Bristow graduated from Texas Tech, go Red Raiders, with degrees in park administration and landscape architecture, and is a past president of the Southwest Parks and Rec Training Institute. I want to thank Brian for giving his time. He's prepared an excellent presentation for you today. We really appreciate it. Please welcome Brian Bristow. Brian, you're muted.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to be here and to visit with y'all. I want to share my screen with you and go ahead and move into the presentation here. I appreciate your time and your willingness to spend your time with us today, and me in particular. How's the optics on this? Can the screen be seen? Can you all?
Yes, we can see it. Everything's good.
Oh, great. Pardon me while during the presentation, I'm going to be looking at my main screen over here where the presentation is, and I'm visiting via my little Surface tablet right now. So, but anyway, we want to talk today about auditing for parks and recreation facilities, and in particular with a view toward accessibility. Just a quick introduction. I thought that was appropriate given our times we're in right now with the COVID epidemic. I'd shake your hand if I could, but as a matter of introducing myself, you see here that, as Mick said, I went to Texas Tech. I think the more important thing I just want to share personally is I've been camping and enjoying parks for 50 years now, since I was in junior high, and Texas state parks in particular. I grew up loving our state parks, and I still do. I wish I could get out to see them as much as I used to in the good old days. I've worked with accessibility in various forms and fashions, even prior to the ADA being passed. You may recall back in the 80s, we had the Texas Architectural Barriers Act, and that was our standard back at that time. Now we have the ADA, and it's even in its new revised version. I want to talk today about auditing. It's kind of an art in a way, and it's a little bit scientific. Auditing is a term that it actually comes from the Latin word aud, which means to hear. It's kind of hard to relate to what we're talking about today, but nevertheless, auditing is looking at what we are accountable for, basically. It's an accountability thing. We measure, we note, we observe the world and the particular elements in it that we relate to in terms of their acceptability, and that we are accountable for them. More specifically, we look at auditing in terms of removing architectural barriers that are in the context of today, site features, facility features that prevent maximum access to those with disabilities. And we want to look at audits today also from the perspective of identifying recommendations and alterations in our talk briefly, and then all of the audits that we conduct in our profession should ultimately lead to removal through the identification of them, through planning of implementing ways to cure them, remove them, and work them into our funding and planning cycles that we go through. What do we audit? As you can see from this list, we audit in our worlds a lot of things. This probably has more in it than any of us individually look at, but the list is quite big. Anything from sites to elements such as camping areas to restrooms to moving inoperable parts down to the faucet handles that we provide and maintain in our restrooms and so forth. There's just a lot of items that we have to manage when it comes to auditing and making our sites accessible. Data collection is the main backbone of auditing. A little personal acronym I have is DED, or DED, standing for Details Enabled Defense. And I think the more detailed we can be in our work and our audits in particular, the more defensible our actions and decisions are. That's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? The accessibility audit is largely data collection. And as you see on this slide, we're after base information. We want to start with something, maps or whatever we have, floor plans of our parks, facilities, etc. We want to schedule our assignments in the best way possible. One of the big considerations and challenges we face today, our agency included, is do we have available staff? And finding available staff, ones who are willing to do it, conduct audits, participate on audits or audit teams, is a real challenge. And also decisions on whether or not we want to approach an audit from a facility by facility basis. Are we a districted or zoned agency, and do we want to break it up into districts and attack it that way? How do we approach it? We want to record the data that we find in the field, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about checklists and so forth. We'll even get into some of the more current means of collecting and recording data. And then we want to report it either through a combination of our transition plans and as our funding mechanisms as well, such as our capital improvement programs, our 5-year outlooks by fiscal year. Maybe we can get these projects executed through our general fund budget a bit at a time, even in these austere days that we're in. Tools of the trade. This may be review for a lot of you, but maybe I can offer a few ideas that are new. I don't know. If we're in the auditing business of our facilities, we want to have several tools, namely, as you see on here, a door pressure gauge. We want to find out if the doors that people go in and out of measure the proper pounds per square inch that must be exerted to open those doors or close them. We want to have a smart level. I don't think we use spirit levels anymore, but those with a built-in inclinometer and tell us a direct read off of the percentages. What you see on this slide is a handy tool that I've used for a number of years. I learned about using it from a fellow RAS carpenter's profile gauge, and I'll tell you about how that gets used shortly, with a 1/2 inch grid to overlay with it. A measuring tape, measure a metal straight edge. I like having a metal straight edge along with me on all my audits, especially when I'm the only one doing them. The reason being, it's kind of like the old survey crews. Survey crews used to have 3 people in them, a rodman, an instrument person, and somebody taking field notes, but it's all one person now. And if you're the only one out there doing an audit, sometimes it's good to have a rigid, straight metal straight edge with a measurement on it, yardstick or whatever, so that you can lean it up against whatever you're measuring and it'll stay up. It's kind of hard to do that in some cases with a measuring tape that wants to curl back in itself. A measuring wheel, digital camera, GPS, receivers, maps, and aerial images all come in handy when we're doing our audits. People, as far as staff, can we use full-time people, part-time? Do we have a volunteer base to draw from? Do we have park interns? All these are legitimate forces that can be used in auditing. Auditing doesn't take a whole lot of training. It does take training in the ability to have a keen eye to put oneself in the place of somebody who's in a wheelchair or another disability and think the way they do. That's the main thing in training, and how to use the tools and the ways of gathering and recording data that we use. Can you use retired employees? Sometimes they'll come back and help out. Then finally, you can use consultants and in the private sector and state registered specialists if your particular state has that license. Finally, there are some other items, just the tag-alongs that you have with like notepads and so forth. This particular picture shows the city of Bellevue, Washington staff person riding on a Segway. This is definitely the apex of auditing. They use it for auditing their sidewalk systems and their walkways and trails and such. It has a built-in profiler, all digital, that feeds information to a computer, measures slope, width, surface irregularities, and a lot of information. That is really for the forces that have a lot of money. Let's talk about checklists for a minute. This is our own checklist that we use. Our checklist was developed by the engineering department. I was not involved in the development of that checklist, and it's an okay checklist. It's a bit cumbersome though. There's a lot of narrative information to read through, even while you're checking things off. And I think there's room for improvement. We'll be updating our transition plan in the next year or so. And I think we'll probably retool this for updating our transition plan. I found one in California on the internet that I think is really good. It's the ADA cheat sheet. And as Mick said, you'll get a copy of this presentation. This one I do like just for the simple fact that I'm a visual person, okay? And I like diagrams, dimension lines, and things like that that show me in 2 dimensions what I'm going to be looking at or what I should look for. And I think the Building in California group, and I've included a resource link to their website, is a good example of a checklist that is really, although it's not interactive, it's very thorough and easy to understand. And I think it's a good one to look into as an example if you want to update your own checklist or auditing procedures. There's another one that's put out by the Institute for Human-Centered Design. These are copyrighted documents, but they make it very clear on their website that you can use them and reproduce them as long as you don't charge for them. They are a very good asset for auditing. They're very thorough. And the main one is the checklist for existing facilities. You see on the left side, that checklist library that they've developed is broken out into different sections. They call them priority sections, and you see those here. They've also developed a set of ones for recreational facilities that you see here. If you go to their website, these are available and can be downloaded and printed and used as well if you so desire. I like them. I think they're a good start in terms of the information that you use to audit and what you record and how it's organized. Organization's a big key to auditing recording, as you know, if you've done it. And it allows you to put photographs into the auditing forms, the checklist forms. It also gives you diagrams out of the standards, the ADA standards, and an explanation of the dimensional and technical requirements and the scoping requirements, both. Scoping being what we're auditing and how many are required, what is required, how many of them are, and the technical requirements as well are pretty well covered in these checklists, dimensional qualities and clearances and things like that. The checklist that to me is the I wouldn't call it perfect. Nothing's perfect. The checklist that I would like to have when I'm out auditing, and that we'll probably be doing when we update ours for the next transition plan update, is one that prompts the person or the user to investigate it I wouldn't say it inspires them, but it prompts them, and it motivates them on what to look for, um, and may encourage them to think like a disabled person, and it clearly tells them what to investigate, either through diagrammatic explanation, short verbiage. Long narratives, like I said, can be quite cumbersome and time taking in the field. Training can take care of a lot of that pre-audit work, though, and lessen the need for that. Personally, I'd like to see a map in our checklists, one that is like a site plan or a floor plan for whatever I'm auditing, that allows me to pre-plan, and while I'm auditing, follow that map and trace my steps, and use it even after I've planned my route and where I'm going on my audit, to reorient myself if I need to. As you'll see in one of the facilities I'm showing a tour through later in our presentation, you'll see that it can be easy to get distracted or lost on an audit of a complex facility with many moving parts. And a map or a reference to keep with you is a real good tool. A digital tablet would be great to have, one with your own self-developed application, one that you can keep an aerial image or floor plans on and trace yourself with. If you've ever used Sketch or some of those other applications where you can take photographs of something you're looking at on your audit, and then use your stylus to sketch or add text to, or scribble handwritings on it on the go in the real moment while you're auditing, those are great. Those good tools to use, and those are available to us nowadays. The checklist I would like to see would include the scoping requirements and the technical requirements for every component or element that we audit. There should be space to write. Diagrams for the standards should be included. For example, playgrounds, are we talking about elevated? It could be divided into elevated play components or ground level ones, whatever is unique to that particular thing that you're looking at. Diagrams are helpful. They're always helpful. Space for referencing your own photographs, and putting your own photographs or dropping them into a digital version is a real handy way to set up a checklist. And then, like I said before, I can't emphasize enough, putting yourself in the position of a disabled person. Mick mentioned I was involved with the Southwest Parks and Rec Training Institute, and one of my first presentations I did about 15 to 16 years ago was one where I talked about playgrounds, and where we were meeting at the time had a fairly rundown playground at the time. Before the Institute met, I had one of my staff build a wooden ramp which replicated a 5 and an 8% slope. And then I brought a wheelchair with me, and it was really good to get people to try it out and see what that is like when you don't have your legs to work for you, and to understand and register in your mind and experience what those slopes are like that people in wheelchairs have to experience. So training into the disabled's point of view is a great thing to do as well. Challenges, checklists can be cumbersome. If you have a checklist for a restroom, and that may be one way you look at it. If you have a park, you may have a checklist you carry around for a restroom. The next day you may go out with a checklist for a campground. Restrooms, for example, they're broken down into so many different parts that you've got to look at and evaluate and assess. The checklist can get quite big if you're trying to do all of one park or facility at one time. It may be better to try it in pieces, and one time, or at first, focus on restrooms or focus on ramps or whatever. Photo sequencing to me is important. And what I mean by that is taking photos is, in my opinion, the greatest tool or help in conducting a successful audit. And one of the tips that I would give you today is, when you're taking photos, in this case that you see here, a restroom, I always start out every time I get into a component of a facility or a park, and I take a setting photograph. And that's what you see on the left. And here I'm dealing with lavatories in a dressing room. I take the setting and then I break it into detailed parts. The setting shows me the overall picture, in this particular case of the lavatory in this dressing room. Then I get to work measuring the various tolerances or clearances, positioning, and components, movable or operable parts, and so forth in an environment like this. I break it down into detail after establishing the setting. It always helps me to come back to that and double check my work. We'll talk a little bit about going from checklists to high tech. We're not there. Just recently, I talked to our own IT department about taking CAD files from various facilities where we do have CAD files. Some of our buildings were drafted back in the old lead pencil on vellum days or ink drawings. Where we do have CAD files, what I want to work out with our IT department, and you may as well if you haven't already, is to integrate CAD files into our GIS platform and use ArcGIS and that kind of thing to integrate those two, where we can have that information combined. When we take notes in the field, when we dump them into the system, it combines them into a very useful tool that shows not only the layout of the environs that we're working in, but it takes that the information we gather in our audit and highlights areas of concern, and it records it. It keeps that data safe. It can be updated easily without paper, without pen. It's a beautiful thing. We're not there yet. And if you are, maybe we can hear from you at the end of this presentation. We have a GIS system here at the City of Allen, and it allows us to go into various properties that we have, parks. This is one of our community parks. And just basically, you can see here the various levels of information that our system has. It's very common, and you may already have a system that's like this or even better than ours. But it shows a lot of information, overlays. One particularly impressive group that I was able to become acquainted with was the Northern Arizona University. I've listed their link at the end of this presentation as well. I encourage you to go look at what they've done. They've done a very good job of updating their mapping from PDF files to very interactive and integrated digital mapping. They've been able to develop their own applications for field use and tie that to their mapping and capital improvements database. They've done what they call a campus-wide audit for ADA, and it's quite impressive what they're doing. And you can see in the bottom right hand a screenshot of what they have and how they integrate the code standards with visuals of the project area with highlights of the specific area on the site where attention needs to be placed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because hopefully at some point in the future, years after maybe we've moved on, all CAD, everything will be on CAD and the files will be moved indoors, so to speak. You can take a look at this slide later when we get a chance. Just know that there's challenges and problems to doing so, not the least of which is our budgets that we have to work with. Hopefully you develop a good relationship with your IT departments if you have one. But even if you can't, there's ways to improve our more simpler systems and improve what we're doing even there. I included this slide, just nothing really fancy, but this is just you can use this if it helps. Gives you an idea of a way to array your data, not so much the technical information or the components of your audit in themselves, but a way to look at your organization, the organization of your data, and the information you might include in a database that you build. But just real quickly, what I want to do is take a look at this. Let me back out here. Well, let's see. I can't do that, but let me go ahead and explain to you what I've done here, and I'll try to send you a usable, or post one with the Institute, a usable one of this table. where I've developed things like a property class that would be where you have a park or a recreation center. A name and location would allow you to pull down a drop down menu of the names of your various locations, Apple Tree Park or Ford Park or whatever, or our the natatorium, so forth. Resource categories and subcategories might be where you further define that. Go into there with rooms and space ID categorizations so that you log that. The component or element might be the toilet stall within a restroom. Subcategory might be your grab bars or your toilet paper dispensers and things like that. The date that these things were installed, if you have that information, reference the ADA standards, and then whether or not you comply with it here, a pass, fail, whether you might have safe harbor, if your facility complied with the 1991 ADA, pictures that you can put in there, how you might mitigate the issue. You might have a drop-down menu there that says replace or repair. Then you might have a cost column that allows you to group items in cost ranges, $0 to $500, $500 to $1,000, $1,000, $2,000, and on upwards. And then later you can sort and filter all this data by any of these categories and allow you to better prioritize and organize them by maybe the fiscal years that you want to be looking out at to attack these problems. What are your funding sources? It might be your general fund budget. It might be a sales tax revenue source. Maybe you get if you're in the position to get a grant rather than give a grant, maybe you use grant funds. I don't know. Whatever your funding sources would be could be identified here. What cycle they're on. Are they in a 5-year CIP? Or what fiscal year might they possibly happen in? And what are your priorities? Where does it stand in the overall bulk of your other projects that you have in your database? Data collection. What is what? Let's take a look at data collection from the viewpoint of 3 different types of facilities. One is a recreation center, another is a park, and another is a historic house. I think I saw a lot of different types of professionals getting ready to attend this today. So I've been trying to include views toward different facilities or sites that would be of interest to everybody. And hopefully I've met that challenge. I challenged myself to do that, and we'll see how it goes. I'm first going to talk about a recreation center. This is one that I'm familiar with here where I work. It was built in 1996, opened in 1997. And as you can see, it's an interesting piece of architecture. It was built when our city only had 20 to 30,000 people. We now have over 110. And so it's been outgrown for quite some time. And you'll see the architecture and the interior finishes is kind of dated. It has a gym, racquetball courts, running track, fitness equipment, also a couple of meeting rooms and classrooms, and it has an outdoor amphitheater. Here's where it is on the site. I like to start where I park my car. I'll start looking at the parking lot where I'm able to park. Is it accessible? Do they provide a ramp that greets me with different color or textured pavement to let me know what transition I'm making from a vehicular setting to a pedestrian setting? Is the access aisle, is it the proper width? Is there the proper amount of parking spaces for the total lot count? Is there enough van accessible parking? I'm going to go from this area here where I just parked my car. I'm going to go in the North Sky Bridge into the facility to the control desk and then take you through it. Over here on the left, you'll be entertained by the ramp. And the ramp is I think it's the world's most expensive handicap, or should I say accessible ramp. That's using the nowadays correct term. It's not only a feature architecturally of the building, but it is a narrow corridor that takes you from the top to the bottom floor in reverse. I guess it was built to avoid the cost of an elevator and to put something interesting into the construction. Okay, I get to the front door. I'm going to check the door openers on the front doors because there's automatic openers. Are the buttons positioned right? Are they accessible? Are the clearances okay? Does the accessible door open and shut in the proper amount of time according to ADA and what they allow, what the standard is? In other words, it's not going to close back on me, is it? I certainly hope not. Anyway, inside the lobby, I look again at the buttons. How high are they? Where they're positioned in relation to other wall features in the vestibule? What are the doorways like in the facility? What is the kind of door hardware? Are they movable handles? Are they twistable knobs? Are they panic bars? I take note of that. I photo document it. The restroom doors, often you find exteriorly, they're a fixed bar type of handle. I look at thresholds, and here we have a good example of a compliant threshold that's low profile, is durable. I use that Carpenter's profiler to take an imprint of thresholds for me when I'm going through an audit. And I overlay that when I've taken an impression to tell me whether or not it's compliant. ADA requires that a threshold be 1/2 inch or less. It can be a 1/2 inch if half of that height is beveled. If it's only a squared up vertical face on it, it can be up to 1/4 inch. So this helps me quickly determine whether a threshold is compliant. Here's the lobby, the upper floor lobby. Is that counter within that height range? Most of our counters are 34 inches, which is compliant. We have a gym in this facility with a jogging track around the upper floor. You see some bleachers down there in the lower background. These have been fitted or designed for wheelchair and companion seating. There's probably better examples of these nowadays. These are already almost 30 years old, and they kind of call attention to themselves, don't they? There is a threshold around the gym floor which transitions it to the concrete flooring around it. Here you see an impression I took of it to make sure that it complied, and it's just under 1/2 inch, and there's a bit of an angle to that front. It's not exactly vertical, and so I believe that would pass under most other people's opinions. I look at drinking fountains. Those are complex. Are they bi-level? Here you see a situation that is not good. On the latch side of the door, there's not enough clearance on the wall for a person coming up to open the door. So here's a situation where I dinged us, for lack of a better term. Drinking fountains are complex in their own right in terms of stream dimensions and heights and strength of the water stream. In addition to that, the position of the spout and so forth. We have vending machines. Are the points at which the user puts in their money or makes their selection, are they within the reach range if they have to come up to the machine from a face forward position or from the side? Those reach ranges are very important to consider here. And not all vending machines these days are still designed to be accessible. We have a downstairs fitness room with equipment. As you can tell, it's cram-packed with equipment. And so I wanted to make sure that we have an accessible route through there, and the machinery had the right clearances between them. And I believe we had a little house cleaning to do after I went through there. It was a little bit tight that day. Here's the ramp. As you can see, it's just an amazing feature, isn't it? It goes over a vertical height of about a 1 story, 10 feet. And it's an expensive feature. It does comply in most considerations. Here's just a palette of different measurements I took. I think the most suspicious one I wanted to find out about was the provision of landings. Since it goes such a high vertical distance, it's going to have several landings along that route. and it's kind of easy to see where the landing is in that top left-hand photograph, where the slope against the brick line turns into a level line. And does that point where the landing ends, is there a 12-inch projection, level projection of the railing at that point? I think there was that day. Anyway, you can see the many measurements you have to take in that. There's a beautiful view out the turning point in the railing. You don't have to always put a projecting 12-inch, by the way, in a situation on these ramps. There are conditions where you do and you don't. Went to the staff work areas. They had they'd been accumulating some stuff on the floor that day. And so there were some improvements to be made there, but the 36-inch minimum width for an accessible route to the back space would certainly be required if there was a accessible need at any of these workstations. And there wasn't that day. Fortunately, it's all movable and could be easily remedied. We have some activity rooms, meeting rooms. First thing you probably see here that I saw when I went in there was the lack of an accessible sink. Maybe it wasn't designed for that. It certainly couldn't be counted as one because of the lack of lower knee and toe clearances for somebody in a wheelchair. It told me, I believe, there was probably a deeper sink than what the ADA would allow for an accessible sink. I believe that's 6 inches deep. Certain percentage of the cabinetry in such situations also needs to be accessible, and I believe that did pass on this particular one. The dressing rooms are a bit dated and a bit lacking, in my opinion. The shower, as you can tell here, is not a roll-in one. However, there is a shower room next door. I didn't go into it. There were people using it, and so I'll have to reschedule on that visit. But measurements such as the heights of movable parts and things like that in the various components of the dressing room. Typically, benches have to be fixed to the floor and have a backrest. Toilet compartments, I'm always wanting to see the grab bars, where they are, how high they are, the toilet, the level of the height of the seat, the flushing mechanisms, the paper dispenser in relation to the front of the toilet and the reach range considered there, things like that. Is the door hardware accessible and easy to use for somebody with perhaps hand or wrist difficulties or disabilities? Coat hangers, are they mounted at a height that's accessible? In this case, it was not. That can be easily remedied. What's the position of hand dryers and baby changing stations? Like I said, I like to take a setting photo of groups of items I can put in one group photo as a reference. I believe those were insulated pipes under there. Hot water pipes have to be insulated so people don't scald themselves or burn themselves. Urinals are always a concern in the men's room. Are the spatial and mounting heights adhered to? Toilet distances from walls, are they centered in a space? Is there enough lateral room side to side? Here's an interesting item, the racquetball courts. If you have racquetball courts, you may have seen this type of door hardware. They're not ADA compliant, and these are what we have currently, and they'll have to be dealt with. But if you can just picture yourself for a person who may not have fingers on one hand or either hand or so forth, it would be better to have some kind of a lever type or blade type handle that can be maneuvered with a hand that's more or less lacking all the fingers or digits on it. That's one of the main concerns with racquetball courts, by the way. The rest of it's pretty clear and easy. A game room downstairs. There was vending machines, game tables. Is there enough clearance around those for people in wheelchairs and mobility needs? Same thing with the jogging, walking track around. If it was a busy day and there was two-way traffic on this, I don't think it would be compliant because of the width of that. And there's certainly no passing areas that are purposely built into that. Your signage, does it have braille? Does it have adequate relief typographic characters and so forth. Is it mounted the right height and position in relation to the door it's in? We've done a little retrofitting with some stickers I see there, which doesn't meet the criteria. I want to talk now about agencies that have been around for many, many years. We've been around as a department for close to 30 years. Texas State Parks and Wildlife has been around for many, many decades. And some of the parks that they have, a lot of them were built back during the Great Depression by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Let's take a look at some of the facilities in our state of Texas. Because of the date they were built and the time period during the Depression, we have a lot of just wonderful and beautiful parks in Texas. And they're some of my favorite parks, by the way. And like I said, I've been going to them, some of them for up to 50 years. The parks were built taking advantage of terrain to dam up creeks and streams and build beautiful lakes. Trees were planted. Wonderful architecture was built back in those days with native stone and materials brought in from the Texas and surrounding regions. But unfortunately, it may no longer comply because of the standards were non-existent back then and were not even thought of. And many city agencies are the same way. What I want to do is just go through a park in Texas. First, I want to show you some of the rich history we have in Texas. Indian Lodge out at Fort Davis State Park in West Texas. I actually went on my honeymoon out there 30 years ago. Beautiful place, almost 40 years ago now. And Caddo Lake State Park, East Texas, just some good examples of the old architecture, native stone and logs, stucco. Those facilities, if they have a historic designation as a registered Texas historic landmark, they are protected and can only be altered in certain circumstances. Anyway, I'm proud to say that the Texas Parks and Wildlife has a ADA branch, and Sandra Heath, who I've talked with briefly recently, I believe is over that branch, and they monitor the ADA. And as an agency that's been around since active volcanoes were still in Texas, almost. I'm being facetious, of course, but they've been around for a long, long time. And this tells you and shows you some of the duties and things that they do and conduct business with in their department, including their own transition planning, capital improvements, and keeping track of public concerns and interest and accessibility in the various parks that they manage. Here's a typical, I wouldn't say typical, but a state park in the Texas area. We're going to just take a quick tour through it, and I go through it really not to stop and really look in a lot of great detail, but show you how I perform an audit. This park, like many state parks, has hilly terrain, which is a challenge, and in some cases what ADA regards as possibly a technical infeasibility in some situations, not always though. I think ADA always looks at ramps as being a really easy to reach remedy for a lot of situations where technical infeasibility may be claimed. Nevertheless, like I said, this park, like many, has some very challenging terrain with, hence we're going to see some things that you'll notice are those challenges in the eventual work at this park. It's divided up like such with a headquarter building, a very beautiful headquarter building and picnic pavilion, a very interesting rentals and concessions building, with many of your other, I would say, basic state park facilities, camping, sports, water features, water activity areas. And so let's just quickly go through now here, and I'll show you where I went. I parked at the parking lot and quickly went up their ramp to their headquarters building. It was when I got onto the main sidewalk that I chose a route that allowed me to take a ramp to the headquarter building. I took that ramp. The other route directly to the building is a very steep slope, but this allowed me to take a comfortable walk down to that level and then get to the headquarter building. There's that steep slope that many state parks have. Here's the sloped access route to the headquarters. Went to the headquarters building itself. I think one thing I wanted to show you here was the hillside. You can see it, while it's not a cliff by any means, it's pretty darn steep. The headquarters building has plenty of clearance around it. The counters looked okay to me. So I proceeded on my way to this beautiful CCC built picnic pavilion. Here you see a better view of the ramp down to the picnic pavilion at this particular park. This is Dangerfield Park, my favorite park of all Texas parks because I grew up going there. But they likewise have a very similar situation with two access ways down to the beach and swimming area. Really challenging how to deal with. The picnic pavilion at this park is very interesting architecturally. I was looking for things like ADA accessible tables, garbage cans, things within reach range for people in wheelchairs. I then went quickly to the boat ramp, the boat pier, excuse me. I followed this route. Here's the boat pier. And of course you can see it ideally should be connected to a accessible route nearby. It very easily can be. It's just a matter of planning and programming it. I went to the rentals facility. Look at the woodwork on this building where they've used, I believe, native Eastern Texas timber, and they've set it into this hillside. It's a very unique facility. It was closed the day I was there, and of course we're in COVID right now. But I would be looking at the counter heights and the serviceability of the facility to people passing by in wheelchairs. Then I went to the fishing pier. This pier at this park has a way to give and take with high water and low water. If this gets to be too steep, there is an issue. If the water's high, it's not so much an issue. And the railing would, if it is steep, the railing would ideally be modified in this ramp area with a edge protection and an ADA grab bar type rail at that. There's a look back at the concessions. The pier itself, at some point, to accommodate wheelchairs, would include at least one position where the wheelchair person can get up closer to the water with a bulged out railing, a lower railing at the top. Then I went to the boat ramp. How do you make a boat ramp accessible? I don't know. Maybe what could happen here, if there's ever a need or a cry for it, would be paving in one of these areas where once the boat's in the water, it can pull up to that bulkhead there, and someone could get in and be helped into a boat. Then I went to the swimming area. Swimming areas are not really used a lot right now. I looked at signage. I then went to the volleyball and the playground areas. Horseshoes were there. Then I went to the camping area where there's camping spaces with a beautiful view of the lake. There's camping spaces that are otherwise nestled among the trees and so forth. The challenge here is with some minor modifications, making a number of these spaces in the park accessible, and do that fairly simply, I think, by just adjusting the grade or the paving material in the table area or so forth, and make maybe one of each type or experience of camping space accessible. Sandra Heath, when she and I talked the other day, told me about handles on some of these jug fill stations at the campsites, and experiences had it with TP and WD at some of their parks, with ADA compliant spigot handles being the blade type, and how now deer, they've actually had some, I think she said, where deer have actually manipulated them and turned the water on. And of course, they're not going to be too diligent about turning the water off when they leave. Road surfaces, are they firm and stable for wheelchair and accessible use? This signage and posting here, I haven't seen anything yet that addresses this. Maybe you have from an accessibility standpoint. I would think at most they could be maybe modified slightly on this camping spaces that are modified to be accessible. I then went back to headquarters. They have a beautiful pollinator garden there for the monarch butterfly. I commend them and salute them for that. That's really a neat feature to see in our parks nowadays. Typical and old pavement, even here at where I work, you see joints where the pavement's expanded or differentially settled between panels of pavement. Minor repairs on situations like that, very common anytime you're at a site or a park or a facility where the pavement's old and you have our Texas expansive clay soils. There's the pollinator garden again. The headquarters building is very unique with, it looks like it was attempted to be mimicking a ruin or an old fort perhaps, nooks and crannies and so forth. Bench seating, maybe one of those could become a shorter bench with an opportunity for seating by somebody in a wheelchair, a very simple modification, and so forth. I then went to the restrooms, and I won't go inside because I've talked about those in the recreation center. A ramp, an accessible ramp looks, striping is something that's always a maintenance issue for us, even with our parks and facilities. There is an accessible route here to the restroom. It's sufficient width. It looks like the ramp is of the correct slope. Maybe the only improvement that could be made here would be to extend this sidewalk over here to that point and make this accessible to the landing before you go to the ramp itself. Seating, again, maybe the bench could be shortened and allow some paved seating for somebody in a wheelchair outside the restroom. A minor thing. Looks like there's sufficient width for signage displayed and to the latch side of the door for somebody wanting to enter this door, and it does have a grab type handle, easy to use. And then I went to the picnic area, same thing with the campsites, could be easily modified to make them accessible with removing slopes and different elevations along the pathway, accessible path to one or two tables in each area. And then I left, okay? I want to talk a little bit about a historic property that I've been looking at. This one is in Texas, and it's a house built in the early 1900s. The one thing about it is, and you'll see, it's a beautiful house. They've done a great job of restoring it, building it making it into a public museum. It is two-story. It is recognized by the Texas Historical Commission, but it does not have a status as being a recorded Texas historic landmark. It has what we call a subject marker. That's put out by the THC, the Historical Commission, which really only just tells the story of the property and how it was pioneered, how it's been preserved or restored, and how it's been handed to the public agency that now manages it. It has to be a recorded Texas historic landmark, at least in Texas, and maybe it's that way in other states as well. But the state really regulates the protection of historic properties, and if they're not recorded, they are subject to having to comply at various levels to the ADA, or in our state, the Texas accessibility standards. And so there's different levels of recognition by the state agency and whether or not they are protected. And when I say protected, that is from having to make certain alterations to make them partially or fully accessible. I started the street and there's no public transportation here. I saw a bit of a conflict with some adjacent signage. The sidewalk had been widened slightly. It could be widened even more fully. But as you can see, once you get down these curb ramps, you're forced into the public driveway into the site. And so something needs to happen there to provide a accessible entry from the public sidewalk at this property. It's a beautiful house, been very well taken care of. There's the front veranda view. Here's the parking, the ramp at the accessible parking. The accessible parking is fine. The only thing I saw that was, could be improved or needed to be improved is the ramp itself. They've done a good job of integrating it with the pedestrian paving material, the exposed aggregate. However, as you can tell, the slopes on the sides are quite steep. And for someone going a long ways with the curb, if that was their only option, they would quickly find themselves being jettisoned that way or down into the ramp. So that needs to be at some point renovated to comply. Flagstone in this case is not a accessible pavement because of the joints, the wide joints, and getting wheelchairs stuck. Almost all of the pedestrian pavement in this particular property was accessible. I found a few places where cross slopes exceeded the 2% maximum, the 1 to 48 slope. The longitudinal slopes were all fine. I look at, again, where pavement joints settle and differentiate, causing a blockage to somebody in a wheelchair, perhaps. They have a very intricate and nicely designed ramp at their facility. It goes up about 30 inches in height, so that's only about an 18-inch rise on each of those runs on the ramp. I looked at the various portions of it. When you get to the top of the ramp, the door thresholds are the real challenges, as they are on many historic properties. The hand railing at the top of the ramp was extended appropriately, as you see here on the right-hand photograph. At the bottom of the ramp, here at the top of the ramp, you see it was not extended at either of those post locations, the 12-inch. At the top landing of the ramp, you'll notice here some of the timbers or the wood is tongue and groove, so it's going to rot quicker than just butt-to-butt joint lumber or timber would. Some of it's settled, perhaps. There's a difference in elevation here of more than 1/2 inch, so that's a problem that needs to be accounted for and remedied. Once you're into the house, this is where you enter from the ramp into the back of the house. You can see the hardware. They've tried to keep historic hardware in this facility. Something will have to be done with the thresholds. They'll have to be lowered and modified to get from the ramp into the room at the back of the house, the entry for accessibility. And then also the placement of some of the furniture interferes with the ability to get to some of the hardware to open and close the door from the inside. The hardware, traditionally glass knobs like this, where it requires a person to twist their hand or their wrist, is not compliant. And the agency that manages this property would probably want to ask for a variance in that. They might be able to defend it by saying that they have staff on site all the time during tours, and the door can be either left open or open and shut for people. They might have a buzzer outside or a way to circumvent that compliance point. The rooms all are connected by an accessible route that's at least 36 inches. Plenty of spaces to turn around and stop along that route. A few points you'll see where they can get up to a window. Anytime you have a historic property like this with displayed furniture and artifacts, relics, and so forth, it's important to keep the turning criteria for a wheelchair in mind, in case you have a wheelchair user by themselves and they get into a move forward into space and they have trouble getting and backing out and returning and getting their way out of that space. Just something to keep in mind. That's easy to deal with adjusting and redisplaying the furniture a bit. Here's the front door entry desk for the non-accessible entrance, the front door of the house. The entry table where public information and welcoming brochures and so forth are displayed was at an acceptable height, and there's adequate toe and knee clearance underneath that. The doorways in the house were all of an acceptable, I believe it was 32-inch width, clear width, when the doors were opened at 90 degrees. Believe it or not, carpet can be a problem in some of these older structures where old-timey carpets have been used in the displays, and they may, depending on how they're tapered at the edge or finished on the edge, where they've been bound or whatever, they could be a half inch or over, or not have a tapered edge and actually cause a difficulty for people in wheelchairs. Something to think about. There's the beautiful veranda that they have on the front of the house. The drop off was a little bit over 18 inches. One could argue that they need that edge protection along there, especially if they do have, make that accessible to the public, and don't want people rolling or falling off either way. Here at the end of the presentation, I wanted to put some things for you, resources to take away, some terminology that may be useful to you, and I'll go through them real quick. Don't have to look at the whole slide, but these are the key terms that I either covered today, or you may want to review yourself and refresh your memory on the ones in the red. And I've gone through definitions of these on several slides that may be of use to you. I've tried to include graphics that may help cement the concepts in your mind if you study them. Safe harbor is a term that sometimes throws people. And what is excluded, amazingly, a lot of our world is excluded in terms of safe harbor. A lot of the guidelines and standards dealing with recreation and ADA were not developed until the last 10 years. Scoping and technical and feasibility issues and requirements. Undue burden is a term you'll want to, if you're not already familiarized with, is one that you can use to describe your situation when you're requesting a variance or a hardship or a burden, if you ever get nailed with a situation. Here's some resources. Accessible mapping can be accessed at many locations. I put a few of my favorite ones that are up here. There's the second one is that Northern Arizona University that has a really well-developed mapping system for ADA and their campus. And then ArcGIS, if you use that as a tool in your digital and IT world, there's some geo-referencing platforms or apps that can be merged with that to allow you to gather data in the field and quickly transmit it to your IT group if they're managing the GIS and you can't get to it real easily. You can merge those worlds together. Accessible mapping up at the top. There's what I thought was a good blog site about 3D mapping. I want to just let you know that all photos I've used in this presentation are royalty free and can be found at Unsplash. I'm not doing a plug for them necessarily, but just to let you know that I was cognizant of that feature. I've also included some flashcards, little gag with the lightning, of course, and the flash. But anyway, hopefully these it may be of interest to you. I don't know. There's 15, I think there's 15 flashcards I created with different questions and bits of information that you may find interesting. You can always just print them out and review them real handily anytime. And I hope they're of use to you. And feel free to use them any way you wish, including the safe harbor diagram that I created there for you. Safe harbor, what it is, things like that. What is an alteration? That seems to be a fuzzy area for somebody. Are we doing an alteration or not? look again whether or not you're doing a remodeling or a renovation or a rehabilitation or a reconstruction or a rearrangement. All the re terms are a good way to keep that referenced for you handily. I felt I went to my dictionary and really tried to pull together ways to describe alterations in ways that we can relate to easily in our common everyday dialogues. And like I said, there's 14 or 15 of these things. And I see I've gone 15 minutes past the hour, Mick.
Yep, that was excellent, Brian. Thank you. We only had 2 questions, one which was already answered. The first question was, what was the tool called for threshold measurement? And Chad responded, it's a carpenter's contour gauge or profile gauge, which is correct. And then the other question was, will the checklists that you referred to, will those be available? And so I believe you said that you wouldn't mind sharing some of your checklist.
Absolutely. I'll share whatever I can, whatever I have.
Okay.
If they're, Mick, I would ask if there's an opportunity for them to specify what they'd really like to see. If there's one in particular that they let us know. But I know you'll post this in a couple of weeks, and between now and then I can talk to you and we can make sure that gets available to them.
Absolutely. So if you would like to, you can email your questions to Mindy and we can pass those on. I would ask Brian if you wouldn't mind stop sharing, and we'll wrap up and call this, we'll end the sessions here in just a second. Just a couple more highlights here that I need to share. All right. Okay, so thanks again to Brian. That was an excellent overview and a great presentation. You will receive an email with a link to do an evaluation next week when Mindy returns. We appreciate you doing this as soon as possible. If you can, when you see it, that would be great. And again, our sponsors, thank you, especially LL Johnson and Rainbird and Musco. Cannot do this without you. It's nice to get these free CEUs and see you at Southwest Parks and Rec Training Institute, as well as Park Planning and Maintenance Academy. It was sad not hosting everybody for Park Planning and Maintenance Academy in August, but again, the dates next year in Aurora, Colorado are August 2nd through the 5th in 2021, and watch for those emails to get registered. So let me see, we have one more comment here, and
Add a comment if I could.
yeah. And it was, oh yeah, it was just, the last comment was, thanks Brian, and go Texas Tech. Hello from the Dunaway team. So yeah. Brian, what's your final comment?
Well, my final comment is just encourage everybody to support your state parks. If you're in Texas or Arkansas or any of the other states, Oklahoma, wherever you're at, support your state parks. I know here in Texas, we can do that through our license tag renewal process with the state. There's a line you can give to Texas State Parks, and certainly enjoy them and go visit them anytime you can.
Very good. All right. Well, again, we want to thank everyone for coming, and we wish everyone a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.